Okay, so this week's Torah portion is Parshat Lech, which is a magnificent Torah portion. There is so much wisdom and like just life experience in this portion. It's actually in the Hayom Yom, which is a book that the Rebbe published. I have it right here next to my desk. The Hayom Yom has a daily message for every day. And when it comes time to this Torah portion, the daily message on the first day of this Torah portion is a now very famous quoted Hasidic phrase, "Men darf leben mit der Zeit," which in English means one must live with the times. What does it mean? What do you mean, live with the times? Yes, we're living with the times. But the Rebbe elaborates in his daily message that we must live with the Torah portion of the week, and more specifically, every day, live with the segment of the Torah portion that we read daily. So it's not enough to study the weekly Torah portion, but we should live with it, right? Because Torah is alive. Torah is God's truth. Torah is eternally and universally relevant. So we're not reading stories and episodes and experiences that our ancestors went through, but we're actually learning Torah and living with Torah provide us with the specific guidance that we need in our everyday moments of life. And the weekly Torah reading holds the key to that guidance. And sometimes you feel like reading the Torah portion of the week and the messages of the Torah portion, it's as if you feel like Hashem is talking to you at that moment. You know, like, how did you know I was dealing with this? How did you know that I was struggling with this? It's as if Hashem is talking to me at this moment. So midar leben mit der Zeit, it's so appropriate to be restarting our Torah classes in this parsha when this Hasidic phrase, we use this Hasidic phrase, living with the time. So this week, we begin living with our forefather Abraham and Sarah. And every step of their journey is very symbolic of our journey. Symbolic and connected, and teaches us so much about our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with our Shem and our life and our struggles and our triumphs. So we're living this week, and for the next few weeks, we'll be living with our forefathers, our foremothers, and learning so much from their life experience. So we don't only study, but we live it. And that's the beauty of Hasidus. Hasidus gives us that insight, you know, how to take the Torah portion of the week and make it very relevant and connect it personally to us. Right after the daily message of the first day, right? So the first day, Sunday, when we start learning the Parsha of Lech, the Rebbe uses, the message the Rebbe gives is one must live with the times. But the second day, Monday, the Rebbe gives us a very, very beautiful message. And I wanted you to see this message, so I put it on my PowerPoint so you could read it together. So let me share the screen for a minute so you can do this with me. So here we are. This week's Parshat is Parshat Lech. The title of today's class is Why Was Avram Chosen? But we'll get to that. First, I want to do a very beautiful Hayom Yom with you, the Hayom Yom of the 3rd of Cheshvan. So let's put it up on the screen. So this week's Parsha, Parshat Lech, is the 3rd Parsha in the series. We just started from the beginning, from Bereshit, right? Just after Simchas Torah, we completed the 5 books of Moses, and now we start from the beginning. And this is the message that the Rebbe brings in to us at the beginning of our Parsha. Bereshit is a happy Parsha. even though its conclusion is not so pleasant. Noach, or I'm sorry about the typos, Noach is a parsha of the flood, but the end of the week is cheerful because our patriarch Abraham is born. The really joyful week, though, is lecha. For throughout the entire week, we live with Abraham, who was the first to utterly devote his life to proclaiming God's existence in the world. And Abraham bequeathed his self-sacrifice as an inheritance to all Jews. So this is very, very interesting, but there's something about this week's Parsha, which is the third Parsha, that the Rebbe and Chassidus calls this Parsha the happiest Parsha, the most joyful Parsha. Not the first Parsha, not Bereshit when Hashem created the world, because as we read, there wasn't a very happy ending. Adam and Chava were banished from the Garden of Eden, and then there were some unpleasant things that happen after that in the Parsha. So it starts off with a good beginning, but it doesn't end all that pleasant. And Parshas Noach, which is the second Parsha, is also not all that pleasant. We're talking about a flood, Hashem destroying the whole entire world at that point. But Lech Lecha is completely good on all ends. It's completely positive. And so when we talk about Levin Mitarsai, living with the times, this Parsha, it's like every day of this week, we're alive, we're living with Avram, and there's a joy in living with Avram, and there's a simcha, and there's a happiness. And this, I think, is just such a beautiful premise to set as we begin the class, to know that this week is a joyous week. And that's how this week is coined in the Hayom Yom. So let's talk about our forefather, about Abraham. There's a question that many, many commentators ask. And I want to address this question today. And I want to try to answer this question today. I think it's a very, very fundamental question. And the question is, why was Avram chosen? Why was Avram chosen to be the father of the Jewish nation? The Torah, if you read the Bible, the Torah does not tell us why, which means that we have to discover the answer ourselves. You know, the Torah does not say this is the history of Avram, or this was the details of Avram's life. All we know about Abraham before this week's Parsha are two very, very small details about his life. We know that one, Avram was married to a woman named Sarah. Okay. And the second thing we know was that Avram and Sarah are childless, that Sarah was infertile. But other than these two details, we do not know anything about Avram. We are not informed that he was a righteous person, or even an admirable person, or even a respected person. Nothing. Parshas Noah, the previous Parsha, ends with this passage, and Terach lived 205 years, and Terach died in Haran. Terach was who? What? And then this Parsha begins. And how does this Parsha begin? Not with an introduction about Avram, but it begins immediately with the following passage. How does the Parsha begin? Let's look at it on the screen. And the Lord said to Avram, Lech lecha, go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you. So beautiful, powerful. This is almost like Hashem's mandate to Avram. Leave your land. But who is Avram? Why Avram in particular? Why is Avram chosen with this mission to become the father of the Jewish people and to inherit the land of Israel? Why Avram in particular? So there are so many beautiful interpretations given. I chose 3 beautiful ones given by Jewish commentators over the generations. I chose 3 that we'll focus on today. And these 3, because they spoke to me and because I think they're relevant to us today in modern day 2021. These messages are what we need to hear today as well. These are the messages that we need to live with. Mitzvah Levin, Mitzvah Tzai, living with the Parshat, right? So the first answer I want to share was given by a very great Jewish leader, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And Shimshon Raphael Hirsch explained that the reason why Abraham was chosen to be the father of the Jewish people was because Abraham was comfortable being a minority. Abraham was comfortable being a minority. Just think about that for a moment, right? What is the Jewish people? What do we make up? Like 2% of the population, I think, or 2% of the American. I don't know the statistics, but we are a minority. The Torah refers to Avram as Avram HaIvri. Ivri is loosely translated as Avram the Hebrew, right? But in Hebrew, in the Jewish language, the word Ivri means a side, one side and the other side. Why was Avram called Avram HaIvri? Because the entire world was on one side of the fence and he was on the other, right? He was the first person in the world, maybe not in the world because we had few select people before him, Noah, right? But he was the first person in his generation to spread the idea of there being one God, a monotheistic, right? The monotheistic approach. The entire world at his time was pagans. So he was on one side, literally, while everyone else was on the other. And this is why he was chosen, because there's something so valuable. There's something so special. There's something so deep about being comfortable being a minority. What I want to do is put on the screen something that Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch wrote to the Jews of Germany in the 19th century. And I think what he wrote then is pertinent to us as well today. Let me put it up on the screen. I'll read it together. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes, the isolation of Avram was the result of his total opposition to the culture of his day. His values stood in stark contrast to the accepted values of that era. Abraham's values were a rejection of the attitude that I am an upright person of consequence since I live according to what fashion dictates. For Avraham Avinu, what mattered was a person's relationship with God. In our era, people advocate for Judaism according to the spirit of the times. The sharpest protest against this idea is the mitzvah that was spoken to Abraham. Lecha, go forth, be different. Did the appearance of Avram in history fit the spirit of the times in Babylonia, Syria, Sidon, Egypt? From the time of Avram until today, great courage and complete faith in our inner truth is demanded of us. How could we have survived and how will we survive if we had not inherited from Avram a permanent minority status that comes with the courage to be different? The courage to be different. Somehow this really struck me, and I think this is so powerful, right? Think about Avram. If he were alive today in an era where we are evaluated by our number of social media likes, or, how many people follow us on Facebook or Twitter, he would not be looking for likes, right? Just the opposite. He was very comfortable being who he was because he was standing for truth. And because Avram is our forefather, his life is a lesson for us. Not only is it a lesson for us, but like the Rebbe writes in the Hayom Yom, Avram bequeathed. He gave us all these gifts. We inherited these gifts from Avram. We take our cues from him. And so in a way, we too, all of us, take the unpopular road, right? That we live in a society where we are a minority, right? We have this cultural tension that we live with. But from Avram Avinu, from Avram our forefather, we have the capacity to be strong and to stand for our principles, even when we're a minority, even when we're so different than everyone around us, right? I experience this with my children. Now when we drive around the neighborhood and many homes are decorated, for Halloween and with ghosts and goblins and who knows what, and we definitely, our home sticks out on the block, right? And in a few more weeks, it's going to be holiday lights in homes. I remember reading something where Steven Spielberg, the big movie director, he described an experience he had in his childhood. And he writes that I always wanted that we too would have Christmas lights in the front of our house. In our neighborhood, they gave prizes to the best Christmas light displays. And I would beg my dad, please put up a few lights. And he would say, no, we're Jews. But I so wanted it. I just so wanted to be like everybody else. Dad, would you just exchange the white light in our porch, the one white bulb in our porch, for a red bulb? And his dad would say no. And he would nudge and keep nudging. Maybe just exchange the white bulb for a yellow bulb. But his dad said, no, not in any way, shape, or form. That is a very strong message to give to our children. And growing up outside of the land of Israel, growing up in America where we're a very strong minority, I think we are shaped by such a minority experience, but it also gives us so much pride and hopefully a lot of strength. So that's the first powerful message I took from this parsha, why Avram was chosen, specifically Avram Ha'ivri, Avram the minority. There's a gift in having the courage to be different. The second explanation I want to bring is an explanation brought by the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh was an 18th century Moroccan commentator on the Torah. Wrote beautiful commentary on the Chumash, on the Torah. He spent his last few years in the land of Israel, and he's actually buried in Jerusalem. He writes something so beautiful. He says, do you know why Abraham was chosen to be the father of a Jewish nation? We know nothing about him before this parsha. You know why he was chosen? And he describes the following. In a similar vein to the Hayom Yom, in a similar vein to the message that we started off with. In the beginning, in Bereshit, when Hashem created the world, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Something doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, there was no direction. There was no clear mandate. There was no land. There were no people chosen. Lech lecha, the beginning of this week's Torah portion, is the beginning of a working plan. Hashem gives Avram a command to do something. Hashem chose him. Hashem gives him a mandate. Hashem attaches Avram to a land. And all of a sudden, the world starts to work. It starts to work. Lech lecha is the start of everything. And actually, think about it, but it's as if Hashem tried 3 times. The first time, Bereshit failed. The second time, Noah failed. But the third time is a charm, right? All of a sudden, things work. Things go into motion. Why? Because we have the beginning of a chosen people, the nation of Israel, the land of Israel, the Torah of Israel. When there are no religions, there's no nations, when there's no borders, when there's no boundaries, it sounds magical, right? It sounds like the dream of universalism, like all this perfect, like utopian time. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. The world needs borders. The world needs nations. The world needs countries and religions and identities. We need to have a calling. We need to have a mandate. We want to be connected to a land. We want to have a homeland. And that's why Avram is chosen specifically now at this point. It's like the world, Hashem is ready to choose a person, a worthy person, somebody who's comfortable being a minority, someone who's already spreading the monotheistic ideas. And Hashem says, now it's time to give the people a clear mandate. The world needs a Torah. The world needs a chosen nation. And this chosen nation needs the attachment of a land. And we see at the beginning of this parsha, Lech lecha. Hashem says to Avram, go forth from your land. It's time for a new beginning. It's time to inherit the land of Israel. I want to give you the land of Israel. I want your children to inherit this land. It will be yours forever. Now the world has a working plan. And now the Jewish people are chosen. They have a mandate to live by and a place to call home. And there's something so meaningful about this relationship. The relationship between the Jewish people and the Torah, and the Jewish people's connection to the land of Israel. And I just want to quote 3 lines, from the Orach Chaim. Beautiful, beautiful lines. Go ahead. Yes. You're muted, Linda, but if you need to go, feel comfortable.
Thank you. I got to go. I'll speak to you soon. God bless. Thank you.
The land of Israel is meant. So I'm going to bring up the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and he just beautifully, the Orach Chaim writes, the land of Israel is meant for you, and you are meant for it. I will show it to you, and I will show you to it, because without each other, the divine presence cannot rest on either one. So there is something very, very special, very necessary about having a Torah, a chosen people, and the land that we are connected to. And now for the third explanation. This third explanation is a beautiful explanation brought by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who just recently observed his first yard site. Abraham is the most influential person in the world, right? Until today. You know, if there was a chart of the influencers, of the top influencers, Abraham would be at the top. Why? Because he made probably the biggest change to the world, right? Christianity, Islam, and of course, Judaism and the rest of humanity too, have all been influenced by Abraham. But what's interesting to note, and Jonathan Sacks points this out, is that in practice, Abraham did not command any great army. Abraham did not perform any huge miracles. He did not make any prophecies, right? We have no stirring speech from Abraham to remember by heart. He is an outstanding historical example of influence, but without physical force. Here is the only sentence that the Torah gives us in an attempt to demonstrate to us why Abram was chosen. And what is the verse in this week's Parsha? I'll bring it up on the screen. For I have known him because he commands his sons and his household after him that they should keep the way of the Lord to perform righteousness and justice. What do we see from this verse? We see something so astonishing, so essential. We learn from Abraham how he is a father, how he raises his children. And that's why Abraham was chosen to be the first Jew, the father of the Jewish nation. Abraham was chosen because he was a good father to his children, because he cared about his family, because of these instructions he gave to them and to other members of his family. And this is why till today we call him Avraham Avinu, Avraham our father. Not because he fights for social justice and not because we hear of any big miracles he performs. No, nothing so dramatic. All starts in the home. Avram and Sarah create a home, and from that home emanates goodness and kindness, and these values get passed down, and that is how Avram changes the world from the inside out. I think this approach is very revolutionary. You know, we know of very many powerful leaders in our history that had a miserable personal life. Their influence perhaps was felt, you know, throughout the world, but they were miserable at home. They behaved badly towards their wife and their children. And here with Abraham, the first father of our nation, we find a different focus. The focus is on the home. The focus is on education. The focus is on parenting, of raising a family. That is godly. And that is the primary mission of a Jew. I just want to quote Jonathan Sacks' writing because it's so beautiful to read it in his words. Put it up on the screen. The great scenes in Avram's life, waiting for a child, the birth of Ishmael, the tension between Sarah and Hagar, the birth of Isaac and the binding, are all about his role as a father. Judaism sees parenthood as the highest challenge of all. To know the mind of God, we do not need theoretical physics. We simply need to know what it means to be a parent. And so, just to summarize, in summation, There are three reasons we brought today's class why Avram is chosen to be the father of our nation. And these three lessons I think are very relevant to us. Number one, to live as a minority without apology or embarrassment, and to be proud of who we are, not to be ashamed of being a minority. Number two, the importance of having a mandate, nations, boundaries, being connected to a land. That's what makes this a working plan. That's why lecha works. And knowing our connection, our intrinsic connection to the Torah and to the land of Israel. And number three, which is perhaps the most important, the most and the deepest, that influence begins at home. And that's where the most power happens. So I hope you enjoyed today's class. I look forward to seeing you next week, Thursday at 12. The class will be uploaded for those who missed it. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Take care.